Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may have noticed that we have two Sifrei Torah out today. And today's Torah readings, for lack of a better way of thinking about it, can be told or can be thought of as the tale of two cows, right? We're going to be reading, or the Torah portion today actually has the story of the golden calf. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then the special Torah reading that we have is one of the four special readings that happen in between and in and around Purim and Passover. It is Shabbat Parah, where we're going to be reading about the red heifer, the red cow. And so we've got two different cow readings that we have today. But let's focus for our conversation today on the first, on the golden calf. And I'd like you, if you would, to open up your Chumashim to page 529. And what we're going to do today, you may have noticed there's some fifth graders that are here and their parents. We're going to start a little bit of a conversation, and then actually Rabbi Ern is going to take the fifth graders out to continue the conversation with them, and we adults are going to continue the conversation in here as we go. But I want to put some context on it for everybody. The children of Israel noticed that Moses was gone for a very long time, at least in their minds. It was a very long time. And they built the golden calf. They started dancing around it. They started worshiping the golden calf. They'd given all of their jewelry to be melted down so that it could be part of the golden calf. Meanwhile, Moses is on the mountain, right? And we get to chapter 32, and God has a conversation with Moses, and he says, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down, that's the backstory, they came, they gathered, they did everything they weren't supposed to do. Verse 7 on page 531. The Lord spoke to Moses, hurry down, for your people, I love it, right? That's like when parents get angry at, one parent gets angry at the child and goes to the other parent and says, your child did this, right? Your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed down low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So Moses now is supposed to go down and face the people of Israel. What should he do? What should he do? If you were in Moses' place, how would you manage this? How would you handle this situation? The people who you left for 40 days, you now come back and they've completely gone off the rails, completely gone in a direction that they're not supposed to go in. What would be your response to the people? How would you manage that? Thoughts? Dana.
I mean, I know that he was obviously quite annoyed, but I'm thinking as parents, you leave the house, and you tell your kids, don't get into any trouble, and you come back, and the house isn't exactly like you thought it might be, and you're sort of mortified, it's like you thought you did a better job teaching them, but maybe you didn't give them explicit instructions, maybe you didn't tell them, I'll be back in 40 days. Don't worry. Don't make any calves. Well, don't actually make them.
Right.
Don't be trying to worship someone else. Just trust me. I'll be back. My brother's got this.
So one of the responses, right? One of the responses that Daniel was saying is, as parents, and Moshe is in a very parental sort of role here for the people of Israel. We do our best. We try to go. Maybe Moshe could have been better at being more explicit about what was going on, because part of their anxiety, part of their angst was the not knowing. So if Moshe was a little bit more specific, and by the way, some of the rabbis say he was specific, some say he wasn't specific, but if he were more specific, maybe that would have been a way to sort of prevent it. But that still doesn't answer the question of what do we do? And that's really what I want us to think about. So, Rabbi Aaron, I'm going to have you take the fifth graders. Where are you guys going to?
We're going to the Fish Find Youth Lounge.
To the youth lounge. All right. Fifth graders, go with Rabbi Aaron to the youth lounge, and the rest of us are going to continue to have a conversation here. You know, and I kind of like, now that the kids are leaving, right, I kind of like this idea of, we're parents. We've told our kids, don't have a party when I'm gone. And we get back and we see the place is trashed, right? The place is trashed. Clearly, they had a party. What do we do? How do we as parents respond? And maybe that'll help us think about how Moshe could have, should have responded to all of this. Marge.
Usually there's some consequences, right? So the question is, are the consequences ones that teach or discourage?
Good. So Marge says, you know, there's going to be some consequences. There's usually consequences to these sort of things. So the question is, how do we think about those consequences? Are they consequences that are going to teach? Or are they consequences that are going to be merely punitive? Or maybe a little balance between the two, right? Depends on how bad the party was. Good. What else? What else can we do? How do we as parents think about that?
I guess, you also sort of, there's the aftermath of it, and then you want to sort of clean up all the evidence, just get it out of the house. It's like, okay, kids, we're just going to get this out of your midst. And I guess the punitive part is when he takes it, he grinds it up, and then he puts it in water. It's the last stuff with water. And he makes them drink the water, and then they all get sick, and, a bunch of them die. But then it gets even worse. Then he's like, well, go, who's with me? I don't want to go too far field. And then the Levium comments like, well, go kill all the other people.
Right, it gets pretty bad. I mean, this was a big deal. This was a big deal. But by the way, what was Moses' first response? What was the first thing that he did, even before he got to the grinding it up? You missed one part. He threw down the tablets. He broke the tablets, right? He broke the tablets. That was his first response, was to break the tablets. I don't know. Fred?
Give him a timeout.
Fred says we give them a timeout and let them think about what it is that they did. Well, they had a timeout. They were 40 years in the desert, I guess. That was a lot, not necessarily because of this, but an amalgamation of things. I would count that as a timeout. Marge? Yeah. Right, breaking the tablets was clearly an act of emotion and frustration on Moses' part. God didn't tell him to break the tablets. God didn't say, we could have. God could have come back and said, these people are not worthy of these laws, throw them down and destroy them. That's not what happened. Moses took it upon himself, and I think it really was an emotional response, to throw down that initial frustration, right? When you get home and you see the house is trashed, right? That initial frustration that you have as a parent. And then you have to sort of pull yourself back and say, okay, how am I really going to respond to this? So we have that initial anger, that initial emotion, and then there needs to be some sort of a thought process that helps us get to reasonable response. What does that thought process look like for you guys? What are the tools that we use? How do we take ourselves away from that emotion and find a way to a reasonable response?
Looking at perfect what I was saying, how to make it a teaching moment, how to make it logical consequences.
Logical consequences in a teaching moment, so it's not just about the punishment. And look, there's a place for negative consequences that we call punishment, right? There's a place for that, because those can teach, but not always by themselves. They need to be put within a context so that they can be effective in terms of teaching, okay? Go for therapy, or in this case, seek divine providence, right? Moses clearly needed somebody to talk to. He wasn't going to talk to Aaron because Aaron was part of this whole thing, right? And so, Moses actually wound up going back up again the mountain and having another conversation with God. God sort of calmed him down, but said, oh, you're going to write the second set of tablets yourself.
Talking about this, we're looking at this model of a parent coming home, their children sort of run amok.
Mm-hmm.
But as I was hearing, I keep thinking of it like a leader of a country or some sort of organized system, leaving and then coming back and finding a completely different system from what that area created. So it goes away, comes back, and I have to imagine the mindset is who's running this? Who's trying to usurp my position here? Who wants to get behind, figure that out?
Yeah, so if we change the paradigm a little bit away from the parent-child paradigm, right, and really think about it as a leader who left and came back, and now the system is different, there's the potential of somebody usurping that leader's role, that leader's position, and that leader may need to think about, well, wait a second, who did this, right? Obviously, Aaron was a big part of this, his brother. I'm sure that was a tough conversation that day between those two brothers, right? If we were a fly on the wall in that tent, right? Figuring out as Moses came back and Aaron tried to explain his role, his part in all of this, that was probably a really tough conversation. Natan?
Along that though, I don't think Moses would be upset about getting his son usurped. First, I don't think there was a particular person here doing it. It was more just this lack of faith in these Israelite people, and that's what hurt him so much. I don't think he wants to be their leader. He feels a huge responsibility from God to be their leader, and then when he sees that the people have strayed so far for no good reason, there's no one coming up, there's nothing to gain. He set out all these rules, and then they've just gone against it. He's just losing faith in the people he's entrusted with.
Yeah, I mean, look, the text itself and the rabbis certainly try to mitigate the role that Aaron plays in all of this, right? To say that, some rabbis go so far as to say that Aaron was cooperating in order to slow the process down, right? One of the Midrashim says, basically Aaron said, they were going to do it anyway, but I did it in such a way because I was hopefully waiting for you to come back before all of this happened. I said, okay, well, bring me all your jewelry and bring me all of your gold, and I'll collect it all, and I'll melt it down, and I'll make it because I'm the one that knows how to do it. Not because he was so excited about doing that, but he was trying to slow everybody down, thinking that if he didn't do that, they would have just gone off and done it by themselves. So the rabbis really tried to mitigate Aaron's role in all of this and make it so that his mindset wasn't the same as the people. He was just trying to deal with a very bad situation. Maybe. Anything else? So there seems to be some different phases, right, that we have in all of this. We have that initial emotional phase, which I think is reasonable. I mean, it's not, let me rephrase that. It's not reasonable because it's emotional, but it's understandable, right? We human beings are emotional beings. We get upset. We get angry. Then there's sort of a little bit of a reflection phase of, all right, what really happened here? And then there's the consequences, right? There's the consequences that come afterwards. And the consequences, as we look at the Torah, we see a couple of different categories of consequences, right? There's, first of all, the education phase, bringing everybody together, right? Saying this wasn't right, this wasn't okay, and here, that was probably also a good talking to. We don't have that in our Torah, but I imagine that Moshe was very effusive in his words on that day as he was talking to the people of Israel. And then there was the consequences, I think, that Diana was sort of alluding to, of trying to get a sense of, well, where are the people now, and how do we respond to those people that learned their lesson in the beginning? And how do we respond to the people that still haven't learned their lesson and now need some sort of an action to be taken? And I think it's really important as we start to think about this to understand not only these steps, but understand our role in when we see something that isn't right. How do we respond to that? How do we respond to that? Do we turn our backs? Well, not a great response. Do we respond solely out of emotion? That may be a normal first response, but it has to be more than that. We need to get somehow to a place where we can have a conversation and make changes in what's happening. And I think that's true whether we're talking about our families, whether we're talking about our communities, whether we're talking about the world. You know, it's interesting. As I was reading the news and as I was thinking about this particular parsha, for those who've been following the news coming out of Israel in these last few weeks, there have been some pretty challenging things that have happened. And for those who are not familiar with it, a couple of weeks ago, there was a terrorist who murdered 2 Israelis, and as a response, there were, and the numbers change depending on who you're talking to. I'm hearing a couple of dozen. If you ask Al Jazeera, it was hundreds and thousands. But there was of Israelis who actually went into a town and rioted and destroyed property and burnt property, and actually somebody was killed and a number of people were injured. And you think about, what's our response supposed to be for that, right? I mean, I read that, and as I was reading it, I'm like, that to me that's a golden calf incident. That's not the way that we are supposed to behave, right? That's not the way anybody's supposed to behave. But I can't deal with anybody else. That's not the way that we are supposed to behave. And it's interesting, to his credit, hold on, I'll tell you the person, I walked away from my notes for a second. I'll tell you the person who actually said it. It was the chief of staff. It was the IDF chief of staff who came out and described what happened as a pogrom. And it was an amazing moment. It was an amazing moment because when we Jews hear the word pogrom, we think about it as against us. This is what happened to us. And he, the chief of the military, came out and said, you know what? What these Jews did was a pogrom. They went in, they destroyed. I mean, think Fiddler on the Roof, going in and destroying all the property and just for the sake of destroying it. And by the way, the story got worse as we were celebrating Purim, right? There were other settlers and other people who were celebrating Purim by continuing the rioting and by dancing and singing in the streets because of that. Well, we're Moses now, right? The rest of the Jewish people have to now respond to this. How do we do that? How do we respond, right? Emotions came out first, no doubt. Emotions on both sides, and you heard it in the blogospheres, and you heard it all over the place as people came out with all sorts of different emotions. But really and truly, we have to get to a point where we can say, wait a second, we as a community, as a society, are not going to accept this. How do we move to make sure that it doesn't happen again? And, by the way, how do we take the people who did perpetrate this and respond to them appropriately, according to their actions and according to the judicial system that is set in place? Natan.
Force
Right. Well, and I think that was part of the challenge. That is the standing order, right? That the IDF doesn't respond in force unless there's very direct orders under certain circumstances. And there have been times where the IDF has gone in and dealt with certain situations. Look at the moving people out of Gaza and all sorts of, I mean, there have been times, but the standing order is that you don't, and it creates an inequity of a situation there. And maybe that's going to be something because of it that's going to change. But we'll see. Marge. So, yes, actually. There were a number of rabbis. I mean, obviously any progressive rabbi came out vehemently against this, both in Israel and throughout the world. There are a number of Orthodox rabbis. There are some Orthodox rabbis who came out against this and said this isn't the way we behave in Israel. But most of the Orthodox rabbinate was silent. And there are a few rabbis that are the rabbis of that group that are supporting it, obviously. I discount them because they're part of that group. But many of the Orthodox rabbis were actually pretty silent. And there are many people, that's why when the IDF Chief of Staff came out with this statement, it was such a startling thing, because very often it's just going to be silence. Right? They're not going to deal with it. They're not going to, or you'll have somebody say, okay, it was bad, right? But you're not going to actually have this sort of stance that's taken. And I was very glad to hear that it was, because what happened was criminal, right? If that would have happened the other way around, right? If Palestinians would have gone into a Jewish settlement, right? The same number of Palestinians doing the same actions, there would have been huge numbers of deaths, first of all, and it would have been a prelude to escalation, to all of these sorts of things. And I think one of the challenges, or one of the lessons of the golden calf story, which is why I wanted to bring it up today, is the need to take a look at ourselves as well as we take a look at the world. Right? The golden calf is clearly a story where we missed the mark in terms of what we were supposed to do. And there were consequences and there were reactions, and some were good, some were not. I think it's a powerful lesson to remind us as Jews that we need to be like Moshe and maybe have that initial emotional response and then say, okay, wait, what do we need to do to make this right, to make the world we live in better?
I think a really big part of this parasha, though, and it's a theme that goes throughout, is this idea of rachamim, where Moshe is saying, we have Hashem Kel Rachum Bechanu, like, we all know that from. But I think, yes, we're holding several spaces at one time. We're obviously upset with the perpetrators, the people that did wrong. They had no business doing that. But we can't turn our backs on Israel and say, we don't like the government, and we don't like this, and we don't like that. We still have to have, I believe that Israel is our homeland, and the Jewish homeland, and to still have this level of rachamim and to support what speaks to us. Maybe it's just not like, here's a bunch of, maybe it's JNF, maybe it's Friends of the IDF, but wherever we can find that rachamim to continue.
So what Diana is saying is that, right, there's the aspect of rachamim, which is mercy. You translate it usually as mercy. It's a weird kind of translation for it, but compassion is probably a better way of understanding that. Yeah, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, I think is what you're saying here. And there have been some people who have said, and look, there have been a lot of challenges especially for American progressive Jews in Israel recently. As a conservative Jew, there's a lot of challenges in terms of the Orthodox rabbinate and what they're doing now in Israel. The government is not the government that many people here would have chosen, and not the government that many people in Israel would have chosen, hence the tens of thousands of people that are protesting every week as they're going out there and trying to make a difference. That's the reality of a democracy, right, is we have to do that. And I think what you're saying, though, is you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, which I agree, and I'm not advocating, but I'm saying Silence is agreement, right? That is a statement from our Talmud that you've heard me say before, shtika kehoda adami, right? Silence means agreement. So if you're silent, it means you agree with what's going on. And that's a problem, because many of us don't. And so how do we, with respect, right, with love, say, this isn't the Israel that I want to see, right? These aren't the actions. And I think Israel is responding appropriately. I don't think Israel is ignoring it. Hence the statement from the IDF Chief of Staff, which I thought was very powerful. Natan, I'll give you one last thing, and then I want to close with a source.
Just to add on to that quickly, I do think it's very important to support Israel, and I think that being critical of Israel is part of that. We should be supporting the Israel that we want to see, because there are so many things that any country can do.
Yeah, I think supporting Israel is helping Israel to become the best it can be. I mean, that's ultimately what it is. And when we see things that are not right, we need to say, that's not right. And here's how this is what I would like to see, and this is how things should be there. And try to help make it so.
Just quickly, it's the same thing we do here. I mean, like, everyone in this room loves this country in, maybe a way that's slightly different than the way that they love Israel, but this country is immune to criticism.
Yeah, no, none of us are immune to criticism. Just ask my wife. She'll tell you I am not immune to criticism at all, right? None of us are immune to criticism, nor should we be, right? Nobody should be untouchable when it comes to that. We should be able to say, wait a second, why did you do that? Do we stand by that? Do we agree with that? I think that's part of the conversation. The question is, how do we do that conversation? I think this is what Diana was trying to say, and you're right, how do we do that with love? Right? How do we do that with love and with the best intentions for that person? As we look at this story, there is a source that Rabbi Ern and I were sort of talking about in connection to this, that talks about in the future there will be a restoration of honor, right, from the mistake of the golden calf. And we liked that source for two reasons. One, it means that nothing is permanent, right? There was a mistake that was made. We need to fix it. We needed to deal with it. We did. We were in the desert for 40 years, right? We paid a big price for that. We'll talk next week a little bit about what Moses' immediate reaction is. Actually, if you listen to the podcast that Rabbi Ern and I did for next week's Parsha, we talk a little bit about that, this idea of vayakel, of gathering everybody together as a direct response to the golden calf. But it speaks of hope for a future. And I think as we find ourselves in the midst of some of the trying times in our lives, right? I imagine that as the people of Israel saw Moshe break the tablets, throw them down, their hope for the future sort of died a little bit with that, right? It's hard when you're in the middle of that to see that hope for the future. And this particular parsha, or this particular midrash, helps us say that even in spite of that, there's hope for the future. There's work that needs to be done. There's things that we need to do to respond, to accomplish the future. But there's always hope for the future so long as we have that connection, and so long as we have that passion, and so long as we have a desire to make that future the way that we want it to be. And so I encourage you, first of all, to read, to learn, to pay attention to the news that's going on not only in this country, but that's going on in Israel, and to make your voices heard, whether it be in your family and at your family dinner table, speaking about these sorts of things, to communities, to classes, to all sorts of ways that you can choose to do that. Shabbat shalom, everyone.